the Mahabharata. The granddaddy of them all. The Mahabharata narrates the struggle between two groups of cousins in the Kurukshetra war and ultimately the fates of the Kaurava and the Pandava princes and their successors. The Mahabharata includes many other works as part of the full package, so you may hear stories that you have already heard, but now you will see how they fit into the bigger picture. This story is about a dynastic struggle for the throne of Hastinapura, the kingdom ruled by the Kuru clan. The two branches of the family that participate in the struggle are the Kaurava and the Pandava. Although the Kaurava is the senior branch of the family, Duryodhana, the eldest Kaurava, is younger than Yudhishthira, the eldest Pandava. Both Duryodhana and Yudhishthira claim to be first in line to inherit the throne. One thing leads to another, and before you know it, a struggle culminates in the great battle of Kurukshetra, in which the Pandavas are ultimately victorious. The battle produces complex conflicts of kinship and friendship, instances of family loyalty and duty taking precedence over what is right, and vice versa. The Mahabharata ends with the death of Krishna, the subsequent end of his dynasty, and the ascent of the Pandava brothers to heaven. It also marks the beginning of the Hindu age of Kali Yuga, the fourth and final age of humankind, in which great values and noble ideas have crumbled, and people are heading towards the complete dissolution of right action, morality, and virtue. Life don't get any better than this. Cheesy predicted. Now let's look back at the older generations in this story and see how this all came to be. King Janamjaya's ancestor Shantanu, the king of Hastinapura, had a short-lived marriage with the goddess Ganga. She had a son, Devavrata, who later becomes Bhishma, the great warrior. Most of you have already heard this story because I have told it to you. Devavrata was the obvious heir apparent, but made the promise to the chief of the fishermen to relinquish his right to the throne, and he takes a vow of lifelong celibacy to guarantee his father's promise. Such a sacrifice for his father's happiness. Now if you remember, Shantanu had two sons by Satyavati, the chief's daughter, Chitrangada, and Vishitravarya. When Shantanu dies, Chitrangada becomes king but dies, so Vishitravarya, the younger son, rules Hastinapura. Meanwhile, what you may not know is the king of Kasi arranged a Svayavara for his three daughters, neglecting to invite the royal family of Hastinapur. What is a Svayavara, Sandy? Uncle Artis asked. A Svayavara is a practice where a girl of marriageable age shows as a husband from a group of potential suitors. To arrange the marriage of young Vishitravarya, Bhishma attends the Svayavara of the three princesses Amba, Ambika, and Ambalika. However, he is uninvited and so proceeds to abduct the princesses. Ambika and Ambalika consent to be married to Vishitravarya, but the oldest princess Amba tells Bhishma that she wishes to marry another. When he asks, "Who?" she replies, "The king of Shilva, whom you have just defeated at our Svayavara." Bhishma agrees to let her leave to marry the king of Shilva, but the king of Shilva tells her, "I don't need any charity," and refuses to marry her. He was still smarting from his thumping at the hands of Bhishma. Amba then returns to marry Bhishma, but he refuses due to his vow of celibacy he made to the village chief. This enrages Amba, so she becomes Bhishma's most bitter enemy, holding him responsible for her plight. Look for her a little later in our story, because she is reborn to King Drupada as Shikhandi and eventually causes Bhishma's fall, together with Arjuna, at the Battle of Kurukshetra. When Vishitravarya dies young without any heirs, Satyavati asks her first son Vyasa to father children with the widows. Wait a minute, did she have this baby before being married to Shantanu? Marius asked. Krishnadvapayana, better known as Vyasa, was a revered sage portrayed in many Hindu writings. He is a Shakti-Avsha avatar of Vishnu and one of the 7 Chiranjeevis. Many regard him as the author of the Mahabharata, in that he recited it to the chronicler and the person who gave order to the Vedas. In fact, Vyasa narrated the entire Mahabharata and all the Upanishads and the 18 Puranas, while Lord Ganesh wrote them down once understanding them. His very name means compiler or arranger, but also it means separation or division, so you can see how difficult Sanskrit can be to understand. His mother, Satyavati, was a fisherwoman who would often pilot a boat. One day, she helped Parashara across the river Yamuna, and he was enchanted by her beauty and wanted an heir from her. Satyavati is all, "Oh no, I do not agree. my purity would be in question. This did not deter Parashara, who created a secret place in the bushes of a nearby island, and under the cover of a blanket of thick fog she was abducted. Satyavati conceived and immediately gave birth to a son, calling him Krishnadvapayana. Parashara restored Satyavati's virginity, gifted her an enchanting smell, and left with his son. Satyavati kept this incident a secret, not telling even King Shantanu, whom she was married to later. This dude starts out a little sketchy. Marian noted. So now Vyasa is going to honor his mother and provide his sisters-in-law with some much-needed heirs to the throne. The eldest, Ambika, shuts her eyes when she sees Vyasa, and so her son Dhritarashtra is born blind. Ambalika turns pale and bloodless on seeing Vyasa, and so her son Pandu is born pale and unhealthy. The term panda can mean jaundiced, but that would be more of a yellow from a liver disorder. Perhaps he was more albino and simply very pale skin pigmentation. Because of the physical challenges of the first two children, Satyavati tells Vyasa to give it another shot, but Ambika and Ambalika say, "No more of this guy," and send their maid to Vyasa's room. This dude's probably waiting in the dark and doesn't even care who it is. Krista says in disgust. Vyasa fathers a third son, Vijara, by the maid Nayaga, and of course, he's healthy and grows up to be one of the wisest characters in the Mahabharata. He serves as Mahatma to King Pandu and King Dhritarashtra. Sandy informed us and stopped to take a drink before continuing. Let's skip ahead a few years to when the princes grow up. Dhritarashtra is about to be crowned king by Bhishma when Vijara, now Mahatma to the king, intervenes and uses his knowledge of politics to assert that a blind person cannot be king. What you don't know about Vijara is that when the sage Mandavya cursed Yama to be born as a maid's son for getting him impaled without a good reason, he was born in the mortal world as Vijara. Is Yama God? I asked, and Sandy replied, he is if you are a Pandava, because he saved them from being burning alive in a palace of wax. His reasoning was that a blind man couldn't control and protect his subjects. The throne was then given to Pandu, the pale and bloodless son of Ambalika. He married twice, once to Kunti, best known as the mother of Pandavas, and Karna, whom she had with Surya. That made Karna a half-brother to Pandavas. His other wife was Madri, who was technically the mother to Nakula and Sahadeva, but she turned out to be more of a wife than a mother. There are many interesting stories in that part of the Mahabharata, but we must stay on track for the overview or we will never complete our journey tonight. Now in retirement, Dhritarashtra marries Gandhari, a princess from Gandhara. She blindfolds herself for the rest of her life so that she may feel the pain that her husband feels. Now that's devotion. Cheesy observed. You might think so, but her brother Shakuni was enraged by this act and vowed to take revenge on the entire Kuru family. And their little dog too. Cheesy squealed in his best witch's voice and we all laughed. Sandy continued, one day, when Panda was relaxing in the forest, he hears the strange sound of a wild animal. Naturally, as any king would do, he shoots an arrow in air in the general direction of the sound. Of course, the arrow hits the sage Kindama, who was engaged in having it off with a deer whilst dressed in a deer suit himself. Everyone erupted into a wave of laughter. It took Marius and Marian several minutes to rein in Cheesy and Errol, who had all kinds of scenarios for other things happening in the forest and the noises they were making. We sat down to listen to the next installment of the Mahabharata. Sandy asked Cheesy if he knew where we left off. Indeed, I do, Sandy_G. I believe Kindama was throwing one into a deer or some such four-legged beast. Errol couldn't hold back a chuckle. Sandy continued, Kindama cursed King Panda so that if he engaged in a sexual act, he would die. Cheesy asked, do you think that includes self-gratification, Errol? And Errol punched him in the shoulder. Sandy continued, King Panda had not just one wife but two wives. What was he going to do? It was such a dilemma that he retires to the forest along with his two wives. This leaves his brother Dhritarashtra to rule despite his blindness. King Panda's older queen Kunti was given a boon by sage Durvasa that she could invoke any god using a special mantra. How did Kunti earn this boon, Sandy G? Marius asked. Durvasa was visiting Kunti's father, who put her in charge of satiating his needs. Kunti patiently put up with ill temper and unreasonable requests to serve the sage with great dedication. Durvasa was gratified, so before departing, he rewarded Kunti with a tip. He taught her Atharvaveda mantras, which enabled her to invoke the god of her choice and beget children by them. Better than any casino tip I've heard of, Marius noted, and Marion added, "Yeah, big tipper. A whale." Kunti uses this boon to ask Dharma, the god of justice, Vayu, the god of the wind, and Indra, the lord of the heavens, for sons. She gives birth to 3 sons, Yudhishthira, Bhima, and Arjuna, through these gods. Nice group of triplets, Errol noted. Kunti shared her mantra with the younger Queen Madri, who bore the twins Nakula and Sahadeva through the Ashvini twins. The Ashvini Kimara were Hindu twin gods associated with medicine, health, dawn, and sciences. They were divine twin horsemen, traveling about in a fine chariot drawn by beautiful horses that never weary, while being portrayed as guardian deities rescuing and helping people they encounter. However, this being a spiritual fathership, Pandu and Madri were required to indulge in a little bit of what the deer was doing, and it kills old Pandu. Madri is so consumed by her own selfishness and being a worse mother than Kunti that she commits suicide out of remorse. Queen Mother Kunti raises the 5 brothers, who are from then on usually referred to as the Pandava brothers, trade as guardian deities rescuing and helping people they encounter. Meanwhile, back on the throne, Dhritarashtra may have been blind, but he had 100 sons, and 1 daughter, so he could find things when he needed them. His daughter was Dasala, born through Gandhari, and all born after the birth of Yudhishthira. That's important when considering royal lineage. These 100 brothers are the Kaurava brothers, the eldest being Duryodhana, and the second being Dushasana. Other Kaurava brothers of interest were Vikarna and Sakarna. The 2 sides are shaping up, Marion noted. The rivalry begins. After the deaths of their mother Madri and father Pandu, the Pandavas, and their mother Kunti return to the palace of Hastinapur. Yudhishthira is made the crown prince by his blind uncle King Dhritarashtra, under considerable pressure from his courtiers. King Dhritarashtra would have preferred his own son Duryodhana to become king. Shakuni, a prince of the kingdom of Gandhara, who later became king after the death of his father, Subala, was also a brother to Gandhari, which made him a maternal uncle of the Kauravas. Duryodhana and Dushasana, 2 of the 100 brothers, plot with him to get rid of the Pandavas. They're getting in with a bad crowd there. Shakuni was known to be intelligent, crafty, and devious. He despised the Pandavas for so many reasons, including his sister, who voluntarily became blind for her husband. He called on the architect Purochana to build a palace out of flammable materials like lac and ghee. Lakshagraha, or the House of Wax as it was called, was constructed. Shakuni arranged for the Pandavas and Queen Mother Kunti to stay there, while he fully intended setting it alight. Yudhishthira was warned by his wise uncle Vijaya in a discussion described in the Adi Parva. However wary, the Pandavas did travel to what was supposed to be a festival. They reached Varanavat on the 8th day of the month of Falguna, when the star Rohini was in the ascendant. The palace was not ready when they reached the town, and it took 10 more days to complete it, so in the meantime, the Pandavas stayed in a temporary house arranged for them by Purochana. They entered the palace once it was complete. Unbeknownst to Purochana or Shakuni, Vijaya had sent a miner to create a subterranean passage with its one mouth in the center of the palace house and the other mouth close to the river Ganges. The Pandavas lived for a full year in the house while the tunnel was being dug in secrecy. From the first day, Bhima and Purochana were conspiring to kill each other. Purochana was waiting to set the House of Wax on fire once everyone was asleep, but Bhima was a night owl, so Purochana didn't get the chance. Sandy continued, Vidura sent them a rat inside of a sack of wheat, but the Pandavas didn't understand the purpose of it. I know, what does it mean when someone sends you a dead rat? Krista the spirit caster asked. Eventually they realized, when the rat died from consuming poisoned food prepared under Purakara's supervision, that he was out to kill them. Another thing holding up the fire was that the House of Wax was to be burnt on an Amavasya night. When is an Amavasya night, and why is that significant? Marius asked. Sandy told us, Amavasya is the lunar phase of the new moon. Indian calendars use 30 lunar phases, called Tithi. The dark moon Tithi is when the moon is within 12 degrees of the angular distance between the sun and moon before conjunction, or syzygy as it's known. Syzygy, what a great Scrabble word. Marion said, and Cheesy added, especially if it goes off the board and onto the table, and everyone laughed, recalling an epic mushroom-enhanced game of Scrabble they had. The new moon Tithi is called Pratipata and is 12 angular degrees after syzygy, which is the nearly straight line configuration of the sun, moon, and earth during a solar or lunar eclipse. Amavasya is often translated as a new moon since there is no standard term for the moon before conjunction in English. These are important days for festivals in India like Diwali, the festival of light, or as times for fasting in the Hindu religion. In fact, these days control many aspects of living. Shani Amavasya denotes the combination of two Panchang elements known as Amavasya Tithi and Shanivar. What are Panchang elements? Marion asked. Hindu Panchangam is an accumulation of lunisolar calendars used widely in Vedic astrology as a static method of timekeeping that differs on the basis of moon or sun cycle, name of months, and beginning of the new year. There are 5 elements of Panchang. Var, the day of the week based on a 7-day week starting on Sunday. Tithi, or lunar day based on waxing and waning moon phases. Then Nakshatra, the lunar mansion, which is divided into 12 constellations or zodiacs according to Vedic astrology. The Karana, or half-lunar day, is based on 4 of them being fixed while the remaining 7 are movable. Finally, Yoga, the lunisolar day calculated by summing the longitude of the moon and sun, then divided into 27 parts in 13 degrees 20 minutes. These are all things that Hindus follow on a regular basis? Magda asked. No, certainly not everyone, but each aspect of Hinduism has its devoted followers who have followed it for thousands of years. It's not everything to everybody, but rather something for everyone. In terms of a date, when Amavasya falls on a Saturday, the result is Shani Amavasya. The days of Shani Amavasya are dedicated to Lord Shani Dev, the god of justice. Ironic, as you will come to realize. On such a night, Purochana, not knowing that the Pandavas were simply sleeping and not poisoned, assumed them to be dead and got the party started a little prematurely. Purochana began drinking heavily and within hours was drunk. Taking their opportunity, the Pandavas set fire to the palace and escaped through the tunnel. An innocent Nisheda woman and her 5 sons, who had come to the mansion for a feast, perished with Purochan. Collateral damage? Marion asked. Meanwhile, on the other side of the tunnel, a boatman sent by Vijaya saw the Pandavas emerge onto the banks of river Ganges and ferried them to safety. News about the fire reached Hastinapura and the ears of Duryodhana, who did not know that his plan had gone awry. He assumed that the Pandavas were dead and he secretly rejoiced. Only Vijaya knew that the Pandavas were safe, and he shared that information with Bhishma alone. Meanwhile, back in Hastinapur, the Pandavas and Kunti are presumed dead. During this time, Bhima marries a demoness Hidimbi and has a son, Gatotkaca. His name actually means hairless pothead, based on his pot-shaped head that is without hair. Whilst they were in hiding, the Pandavas learned of a Svayamvara which was taking place for the hand of the Panchala princess Draupadi. While the Draupadi coming out party, that probably brought out the knights and nobles from around the country. Cheesy said. Yes, indeed. The Pandavas even showed, disguised as Brahmins, under the premise of only witnessing the event. Krishna, who had befriended Draupadi, told her to look out for Arjuna, and she replied, I thought he was dead. I'm not dead yet. Cheesy piped in his best English Monty Python accent. What was the Svayamvara challenge for such a prized flower as Draupadi, you asked? The task was to string a mighty steel bow and shoot a target on the ceiling, which was the eye of a moving artificial fish. This must be done while looking at its reflection in oil below. All the princes failed dismally, with many of them being unable to even lift a bow. Karna proceeds to the attempt but is interrupted by Draupadi, who refuses to marry a Sutta, which are children born from a Kshatriya father and a Brahmin mother. After that, the Swayavara was opened up to the general public, including the Brahmins, which Arjuna was disguised as. Of course, Arjuna won the contest, and the prize was being married to Draupadi. The Pandavas returned home in their glee to inform their mother Kunti that Arjuna had won a competition. Queen Mother Kunti was busy meditating, so asked them to share whatever Arjuna had won amongst themselves, thinking it to be alms. She was too busy to get up off her fat butt. Cheesy interjected, "Thus, Draupadi ends up being the wife of all 5 brothers." Yes, and after the wedding, the Pandava brothers are invited back to Hastinapura. The Kuru family elders and relatives negotiate and broker a split of the kingdom, with the Pandavas obtaining only a wild forest inhabited by Takshaka, the king of snakes, and his family. Through hard work, the Pandavas can now build a glorious new capital for the territory at Indraprastha. "Take us on to war, Sandy G," Marian requested. Sandy reminded us that the Pandavas were building their glorious new capital of Indraprastha when Arjuna elopes with and marries Krishna's sister, Subhadra. "But isn't Arjuna married to Draupadi?" Errol asked. Arjuna was in the midst of a self-imposed pilgrimage for breaking terms of the agreement he had with his brothers regarding private time with their common wife Draupadi. As Errol would say, he was on a walkabout in the city of Dwarka when he met Krishna and attended a festival with him. At the festival, Arjuna hooked up with Subhadra, Krishna's sister. Krishna advised Arjuna to abduct Subhadra since he might not win at her coming-out party. "She's the one in the blue tie-dyed sari," Cheesy advised. Arjuna sent a letter to Yudhishthira to ask for permission, then drove his chariot into the hills and took up the smiling Subhadra in his arms and whisked away with her. Krishna said he could fix things, so he arranges it that Arjuna could marry Subhadra with Vedic rituals. Krishna was a good wingman, Errol noted. "Yes, he was," you added. "If you remember from previous adventures, Yudhishthira wished to establish his position as king, so he decides to seek out some sweet Krishna advice. Krishna advises him he needs to up his popularity, so he should have a Rajaswiya Yagna ceremony which would recognize him as preeminent among kings. That's the one that you do after 100 horse yagnas and invite the kings you defeated over so that you can gloat over them, isn't it?" Cheesy queried. "Yes, Cheesy. And yet they still come." Back in the forest, Arjun burnt everything, forcing Takshaka to flee while killing everyone else who didn't. Maya, a demon king, was living with Takshaka at the time and decided to surrender to the Pandavas and to try to gain Krishna's forgiveness. In fact, Maya became a loyal friend of Arjuna and asked him what he could do in return for saving him from the fire caused when Agni was trying to burn the Khandava forest to cure his indigestion. He built a grand palace named Maya Mahal where the Pandavas could perform their Rajasuya Yagna, or consecration of the king festival. Maya also offered him gifts like the Gandhava bow and some sweet swords, while giving a mace named Vrigadharam to Arjuna's brother Bhima. The Pandavas decide to have a party to show off their new digs and weapons and invite their Kaurava cousins to the new Indraprastha designed by Maya. Nice, when it's party time you have to figure some sort of skullduggery is in the works, Maria speculated. The craftsmanship of the demon Maya was astounding, and the palace was so decorated that if one didn't know the tricks of illusion you would consider water to be land and land to be water. Duryodhana was mystified by this craftsmanship, and when crossing water while believing it be land, he fell down face first into the water. Lord Krishna's queens enjoyed the incident with a good belly laugh which embarrassed Duryodhana. King Yudhishthira could understand his cousin's feelings, so he attempted to restrain the queens from laughing quite so vigorously, but Lord Krishna indicated he should not restrain them from enjoying the incident. "Krishna is such a shit disturber at times," Cheesy said. Krishna desired that Duryodhana might be fooled in that way and that all of them may enjoy his foolish behavior. As Duryodhana stumbled out through the palace in slapstick style, Bhima began laughing loudly, which set off Arjuna, Nakula, and Sadeva. Before you knew it, everyone in the palace was laughing and rolling on the floor. Duryodhana was so insulted that the hair on his neck stood up in anger. He attempted again to leave the palace, with his head bowed in silent protest this time. Again, he lifted up his clothes to pass over what he thought was water, but it was only land, and everyone laughed. Becoming more indignant at each attempt, he tried to leave through a crystal door that he thought was open. He bumped into the crystal door and bounced off with his brain reeling as he danced dizzily around the doorway. Then he stumbled to another door thinking it was a crystal door and attempted to open it with his outstretched hands. The door was actually open and he fell down on his face again in his attempt. He rose and coming upon another door that was really open, Duryodhana thought it was closed and went away from it. Finally, he found his way out and he stormed off with his entourage in tow, picking up the pieces behind him. He was quite a sight walking away with his shoes in his hand and holding up his robes. His own walk of shame. Duryodhana was enraged by the insult and seething with jealousy at seeing the wealth of the Pandavas. Uncle Shakuni had a suggestion. That slimyoid would, Marius noted. He decided to host a dice game with a very special set of dice. When Shakuni's family was imprisoned by Duryodhana, his father assessed the intelligence of his sons to select the most brilliant one. They were asked to insert a thread through a bone and the successful one could eat the fistful of rice provided for them all by Duryodhana. One person could survive to take revenge for the entire clan. All the sons attempted and failed except Shakuni, who tied a speck of rice to one end of a thread and fed it to an ant who took the thread through the hole of the bone. Shakuni was asked to eat the flesh of his own father, which he did, and he created a set of dice from his bones. When Shakuni was the only one left, he was allowed out of prison on Gandhari's insistence. Shakuni had the power to control the number that would turn up when the dice were rolled. "I've had that dream," Cheesy said. The dice game began and Yudhishthira loses massive amounts of gold coins until all his wealth is gone. Shakuni wants more and wins his gold necklaces and jewels. He taunts Yudhishthira into continuing until he loses his kingdom. Sandy indicated this with a wave of his arms. "Why can't he stop?" Errol asked. A chuckle went up from several of the audience, and when Sandy put up his hand they said in unison, "He still had more to lose," and we all laughed. He still had more to lose. Yudhishthira then gambles his brothers one by one into servitude. Then he eventually gambles away himself into servitude. "What does he have left to continue?" you asked. Draupadi, his wife, is put up for his stake and he rolls the bones. "Not today, Yudhishthira," Sandy announced as he pretended to roll dice on the ground. "Oh my, I'm glad Krista isn't here for your sake, Sandy," Errol noted. Yes, the jubilant Kauravas insult the Pandavas in their helpless state and even try to disrobe Draupadi in front of the entire court. But Krishna finally shows some decency by making Draupadi's dress endless so that it couldn't be removed. Dhritarashtra, Bhishma, and the other elders are aghast at the situation, but Duryodhana is adamant that there is no place for two crown princes in Hastinapura. Against his best wishes, the blind King Dhritarashtra orders another dice game. Of course, the Pandavas lose again and are required to go into exile for 12 years, and in the 13th year, they must remain hidden. If they are discovered by the Kauravas in the 13th year of their exile, then they would be forced into exile for another 12 years. The Pandavas spent 13 years in exile and had many adventures and acquired divine weapons given to them by the gods. They prepared alliances for a possible future conflict they felt coming. There are many wonderful stories during that time. In the 13th year, as recorded in the Virataparva, Yudhishthira presents himself to King Virata, a famous cow baron, as a courtier by the name of Kanka. Bhima was introduced as a cook and a wrestler by the name of Vallabha, while Arjuna dressed up in a sari as a eunuch by the name of Brihanala. Nakula was a keeper of horses known by the name of Granthika, while Sahadeva was a keeper of cows by the name of Tantipala, and Draupadi used the name Malini and went as Sarandri, or a servant to Queen Shuchna. The Kauravas are told by sages to look for the Pandavas in places where prosperity and cheer have recently increased. Oh, that's nice, isn't it? Look for the people you hate where things are going well. What does that say about you, mate? Errol asked. Kripa suggests Dhritarashtra should prepare for war to kill the Pandavas, who are likely weak and without soldiers at the end of their exile. A small battle between the king and the Kauravas is entered in secret by the Pandavas. Arjuna eventually saves the king's son and wins the battle for him, making everyone heroes. Exposed now, the Pandavas try to negotiate a return to Indraprastha with Krishna as their emissary, but negotiations fail because Duryodhana objected that they were discovered in the 13th year of their exile and the return of their kingdom was not agreed upon. Those are fighting words. Marius commanded. Indeed, the Pandavas line up to fight the Kauravas, claiming their rights over Indraprastha. The two sides summon vast armies to their aid and line up at Kurukshetra for a massive war. There were more armies at Kurukshetra than at the battle for Minas Tirith in Lord of the Rings. Sandy said and consulted a sheet he carried for such intricate details. The kingdoms of Panchala, Dvarka, Kasi, Kaikeya, Magadha, Matsya, Chedai, Pundyas, Telanga, and the Yadus of Mathura and some other clans such as the Parama Kamajas were allied with the Pandavas.
The allies of the Kauravas included the kings of Pragyotishha, Anga, Kekaya, Sindhutesa, Like-Sindhus, Sauviras and Civis, Mahismatti, Avantiin Madhyatesa, Matra, Gandhara, Pahlika-People, Kambojas and many others.
Before war was declared, Balrama expressed his unhappiness with the developing conflict, so he left on a pilgrimage and doesn't take part in the battle itself. Krishna as well was in a non-combatant role, as the charioteer Sarthi for Arjuna. Wimpy bastard. I don't like that Krishna, Marion stated. He has his faults, Sandy said. Before the battle, Arjuna realizes the opposing army includes his cousins, relatives, grandfather Bhishma, and his teacher Drona. This gave him grave doubts about the fight, so he falls into despair and refuses to fight. Krishna reminds him of his duty as a Kshatriya to fight for a righteous cause. This speech is a cornerstone of the famous Bhagavad Gita section of this epic box set. Though initially sticking to chivalrous notions of warfare, both sides soon adopt dishonorable tactics. Blind King Dhritarashtra required his advisor and chariot driver Sanjaya to describe each incident or the war as and when it happened. The king had questions, doubts, and laments about the destruction caused by the war to his sons, friends, and kinsmen, and feels his own guilt. The great war began after the blowing of Panchjanya, Lord Krishna's conch. Conches were heard around the battlefield as day one of the war began. The Pandavas suffered heavy losses, with Bhishma leading all of the Kaurava armies, rushing with their raised flags against the Pandavas. Bhima led the Pandava army, which stood against them with cheering hearts. Dushasana fought Nakula, attempting to strike him with many an arrow, but Nakula cut down those arrows, the standard, and the bow of his enemy. Bhima and the young warriors couldn't match the prowess of Bhishma and were defeated. On that first day Uttara, King Virata's son, was killed. Krishna consoled the distraught Yudhishthira, having lost his son in the battle, saying that eventually, victory would be his. The Pandavas suffered heavy losses and were dejected at the end of the first day. Day 2 saw great losses by the Kaurava army in a reversal of fortunes. Arjuna realized that something had to be done quickly to reverse the Pandavas' loss and decided to try killing Bhishma. Arjuna and Bhishma fought a fierce battle that raged for hours. Drona defeated Drishtadhyumna and had to be rescued by Bhima's intervention. Day 3 saw Bhishma arranging the Kaurava forces in the formation of an eagle, with himself leading from the front, while Duryodhana's forces protected the rear. The Pandavas countered this by using the crescent shape of a half-moon, with the right horn commanded by Bhima, Yudhishthira holding the center and Arjuna managing the left horn. In the afternoon they brought out the celestial weapons. Bhishma invoked his celestial astras and mowed down the Pandava army on all sides. "What's an astra, Sandy?" Errol asked. It's a supernatural weapon invoked by mantras to summon the energy of a specific deity. It's imbued with spiritual and occult powers which can channel energy into any object to use as a weapon. Krishna urged Arjuna, saying, "The hour has come when you must hold to your promise to slaughter the Kaurava army and fight Bhishma. Behold, your army is being destroyed by him alone." He drove the chariot to where Bhishma's chariot stood. Arjuna took Gandhava, his bow, and sent forth arrows that cut his grandsire's bow in two. As the sun set, the Kauravas withdrew, Bhishma and Drona with them, and the Pandavas triumphed that day. On the fourth day Bhima appeared on the scene with his mace aloft and started attacking the Kauravas. Duryodhana sent a huge force of elephants at Bhima. Seeing the mass of elephants approaching, Bhima got down from his chariot and attacked them single-handedly with his iron mace. They scattered and stampeded into the Kaurava forces, killing many. Duryodhana ordered an all-out attack on Bhima. Bhima, however, withstood all that was thrown at him and attacked Duryodhana's brothers, killing 8 of them, as per his oath during the gambling game. Maria said, "Sandy, was there more to the gambling game than you recalled? Anything else we should know?" And chucked because every story had 100 other stories connected to it. Marius and Marion had spent a lot of time in India recently and were becoming fond of it as an exotic adventure. I think they still preferred the Salton Sea. Duryodhana went each night to his tent overcome with grief, wept for his brothers. He was distraught at the loss of his brother and overwhelmed by sorrow at the loss of his brothers. He went to Bhishma and asked his commander how could the Pandavas facing a superior force still prevail. Bhishma replied, "The Pandavas have justice on their side. Seek peace." But day 5 still happened and the unimaginable carnage continued during the ensuing days of the battle. Day 6 was marked by remarkable slaughters. Drona caused an immeasurable loss of lives on the Pandavas' side as the formations of both armies were broken. Bhima too managed to penetrate the Kaurava formation and attack Duryodhana. Duryodhana was defeated but was rescued by others. Day 7 was a good day for Drona who slew Sankha, a son of Virata. The day's battle ended with the Kauravas' fortunes on the upswing. But then day 8 took that momentum back with many great names of Hindu mythology killed on this day. The day ended with a crushing defeat of the Kauravas. On day 9 Krishna saw that Bhishma's arrows were again slaughtering the Pandavas' army, while Arjuna was fighting mildly, out of respect for Bhishma, whose heart was not in the battle as he did not like the idea of attacking his granduncle. During the battle, Bhishma killed numerous soldiers of Arjuna's armies. Krishna rushed towards Bhishma eager to slay him, who laid down in front of him ready to die. Arjuna ran after him and threw his arms at his feet to stop him. "Stop, O Krishna! Remember your promise not to pick up a weapon. Do not let men say you are a liar. I buy my weapons, by the truth, by my own deeds, will destroy our foes. The task is mine." Hearing this, Krishna, still angry, left. Krishna suggested the strategy of placing a eunuch in the field to face Bhishma based on an old prophecy. On day 10 Bhishma dies. "Wow, he's the cornerstone," Cheesy announced. Arjuna positioned himself behind Shikhandi, protecting himself from Bhishma's attack, and aimed his arrows at the weak points in Bhishma's armor. Then the Pandavas surround Bhishma and driving off the Kauravas, they pierce Bhishma with many arrows until no space on his body greater than the breadth of 2 fingers remains to be seen. Bhishma had promised his father, King Shantanu, that he would live until Hastinapur was secured from all directions. To keep this promise, Bhishma used the boon of Ikshimritayu, or self-wish death, given to him by his father. Both armies stop their battle in honor of the eldest of Bharatas and approach him seeking his advice. The Kauravas and Pandavas gathered around Bhishma at his request, and Arjuna gives him a pillow of 3 shafts to rest his head on and strikes the ground with a blazing arrow to provide him with a cool jet of sweet water. On day 11 Arjuna defeats the dreaded Drona, who was made the supreme commander of the Kaurava forces, according to Karna's suggestion. It was basically to prevent Drona from killing or capturing Yudhishthira in battle. Day 12 saw the battle of Arjuna and Bhagadata. Drona had Duryodhana order the Samsaptakas to keep Arjuna busy in a remote part of the battlefield, an order which they readily obeyed. Arjuna managed to defeat them before the afternoon, and then faced Bhagadata, the ruler of Pragyotisha. Bhagadata had defeated great warriors like Bhima, Abhimanyu, and Satyaki. Now, on his gigantic elephant named Supratika, he faced Arjuna. They fought a fierce duel, and finally, Arjuna succeeded in defeating and killing him. Day 13 Drona's target remained the capture of Yudhishthira. On the battlefield, the remaining 4 Pandavas and their allies found it impossible to break Drona's chakra formation, so Yudhishthira instructed Abhimanyu, the son of Arjuna and Subhadra, to break the chakra/Padma formation. From birth, Abhimanyu only knew how to enter the Chakravyuha formation but didn't know how to come out of it. He managed to defeat great warriors like Drona, Karna, Ashvatthama, Kritavarma, and others. That night, Arjuna heard of the dastardly murder of his son and vowed to kill Jayadratha before the battle ended at sunset, otherwise he would throw himself into the fire. Day 14 finds the Kauravas rallying around King Jayadratha to keep Arjuna at bay after realizing that Arjuna will kill himself if they protect Jayadratha till sundown. Drona challenges Arjuna to distract him and they fight relentlessly, without managing to kill the other. Karna, Drona, Ashwatthama, and Duryodhana all surround Arjuna to keep him from King Jayadratha. The fearful fight raged until the sun approached the western hills. Krishna, anxious that Arjuna's vow should be kept, drives the chariot forward by leaving Drona behind. Krishna said to Arjuna, "You cannot kill Jayadratha till you have slain these warriors. I shall eclipse the sun in darkness so that they will think it has set and been less careful." Through his divine power, he eclipses the sun, creating darkness and deceiving the Kauravas, who are thinking Arjuna must now take his life. In another story, Lord Krishna raised his Sudarshan chakra to cover the sun, faking a sunset. That Krishna had lots of tricks up his sleeve. Errol said. Arjuna fixes an astra and taking aim at Jayadratha, lets it loose. Jayadratha's head is severed just as the eclipse ends and the sun begins to shine again. Seeing that they were deceived, the Kauravas weep in sorrow and anger. During this time, Gathokacha, the Rakshasa son of Bhima, wreaks havoc among the Kaurava, until he is felled by the Vasvi Shakti, a weapon given to Karna by Indra. Karna was planning to use the Vasvi Shakti against Arjuna, however, Duryodhana, desperate to end Gathokacha's carnage, pleads with Karna to use it. Now Karna loses the weapon since it can be used only once and then it returns to Indra. Day 15, the battle continues through moonrise and sunrise when Drona begins to slaughter the Pandava army. Arjuna and Drona meet in a fierce battle but no side can prevail. Drona then fights both Virata and Drupada, killing them both. Seeing that no one can slay this fierce warrior, Krishna advises that they use deceit to kill him. For a guy who's supposed to be a non-combatant, he sure gets involved. Marius commented. Yudhishthira reluctantly agrees and Bhima is ordered to kill an elephant named Ashwatthama but loudly proclaim that Ashvatthama, Drona's son, was dead. Drona's legs turn to water and he cannot believe that a mighty warrior the like of Ashwatthama could be killed by Bhima. He turns to Yudhishthira for verification, "Is this true?" to which Yudhishthira, the ever-truthful, replies in the affirmative. Drona is so distraught by the loss of his son that he drops his weapons and goes into meditation to leave his body. Drishtadhyamna killed him to avenge his father's death and satisfy his vow. When Ashwatthama heard about the deceit, he was enraged and fired the Narayanastra weapon against the Pandava army. Krishna told everyone to lay down their weapons and lie on the ground since this is the only way the weapon could be rendered harmless. Kunti requests Karna to join the side of the Pandavas, telling him that he is her eldest son. But Karna says he will spare all the Pandavas, except Arjuna. On the 16th day, Karna was made the supreme commander of the Kuru army. Shailya was made charioteer of Karna and only Shailya could match Krishna as a charioteer. Arjuna successfully resisted Karna's weapons with his own and also inflicted casualties upon the Kaurava army. Bhima, in a separate fight, seized Dushasana, ripped off his right arm from shoulder, killing him and tearing open his chest so that he could drink his blood and carry some to smear on Drupadi's untied hair, thus fulfilling his vow made when Drupadi was humiliated. On the 17th day, Karna defeated the Pandava brothers Nakula, Sahadeva, and Yudhishthira in battle but spared all of their lives. He wants Arjuna, Cheesy announced. And everyone cheered for Arjuna. I guess we all figured he was the righteous one. Arjuna goes to Yudhishthira's tent to check on him, but he insults Arjuna because he thinks he has run from Karna. Can you imagine such a thing? Shame on Yudhishthira. Marius Proc mind. In shame and anger, Arjuna draws his sword against Yudhishthira and has to be pacified by Krishna. They do however kiss and make up, so Arjuna goes off to kick Karna's ass. Karna and Arjuna battle each other in a ferocious fight, until Parshurama's curse comes true and Karna's chariot wheel sinks to the ground. Karna cries out for a timeout and Krishna says, "What about Karna's ruthlessness unto Abhimanyu while he was similarly left without chariot and weapons?" That was enough, and Arjuna shot his arrow which decapitated Karna. It's a little-known fact that before the battle, Karna's sacred armor that he liked to call Kavika and a matching pair of darling earrings called Kundala were taken as alms by Lord Indra, which resulted in his death by Arjuna's arrows. Twice Lord Indra has impacted the battle. On the final day of the battle, Shalya is made the commander of the Kauravas but is killed by Yudhishthira. Shakuni is killed by Sadeva, and none of the Kaurava army except Ashwadama, Duryodhana, Kripasharya, and Kritavarma survived the war. Realizing his defeat, Duryodhana fled and headed towards a lake to cool down his body, which became hot with anger. Krishna took the Pandavas to the lake and Bhima compels Duryodhana to get out of it. That Krishna is such a shit disturber. Cheesy noted again. They fight a mace battle, but Duryodhana is invincible because of his mother Gandhari's boon that his body be impenetrable. Bhima flouted the rules, however, on the advice of Krishna, and struck Duryodhana beneath the waist in such a way as to mortally wound him. Duryodhana was left to die by the Pandavas. Ashvatthama, Kripasharya, and Kritavarma met Duryodhana at his deathbed and promised to avenge the actions of Bhima, so they attacked the Pandavas' camp later that night. However, amongst the dead were Drishtadyumna, Shikhandi, Uttamajas, and the children of Draupadi, who were killed thinking them to be the Pandav brothers. In the end, only the 5 Pandavas, Krishna, Satyaki, Ashvatthama, and a few others survived the Kurukshetra war. Yudhishthira was crowned king of Hastinapur for 36 years, but he renounced the throne, passing the title on to Arjuna's grandson, King Parikshit, after Krishna's demise. After seeing the carnage, Gandhari, the queen who had taken the vow of blindness for her husband, now having lost all of her sons, curses Krishna to be a witness to a similar annihilation of his own family. She believed him capable of stopping the war. Krishna accepts the curse, which bears fruit more than 30 years later. The concept of family should be highlighted there. Maybe I will have a definition. That's quite a story, Sandy. Errol noted. Sandy continued, "Hang on a minute, mate, we're not done here. The Pandavas decide to renounce everything and, clad only in animal skins and rags, they retire to a mountain top in the Himalayas. This represents the climb towards heaven in their bodily self. A stray dog travels with them. Their ascent of the Himalayas on their way to heaven leads to Mount Sumeru. One by one the brothers and Draupadi fell along the journey. As each stumbled, in his infinite wisdom, Yudhishthira gives the rest of the group the reason for their failure. Draupadi, although a dutiful wife to all her husbands, was partial to Arjuna, and this was her sin. When Nakula fell, it was because he was vain in his looks, and Sahadeva was arrogant in his knowledge because he was the most intelligent. A real smarty pants. Errol noted. Bhima was proud of his strength, which Yudhishthira said was his weakness, and in Arjuna his pride in his archery skills was his downfall. Only the virtuous Yudhishthira, who had tried everything to prevent the carnage, and the dog remained upon meeting the chariot to heaven atop Mount Sumeru. At first Lord Indra would not allow the mangy beast on his nice clean chariot to heaven, but Yudhishthira would not leave without the dog. He claimed the dog had done everything that he had done and should be afforded the same opportunity. After a bunch of fives up the hooter, he agreed. Cheesy said in his best Cockney accent. Obviously the message was somewhat deeper than that. The dog revealed himself to be the god Yama and took Yudhishthira to the underworld, where he could see his siblings and his wife. After explaining the nature of the test, Yama takes Yudhishthira back to heaven and explains that it was necessary to expose him to the underworld because any ruler worth his salt must visit the underworld at least once in their life. Yama assures him his siblings and wife will join him in heaven after they've had a dose of the underworld equal to their vices while in their earthly selves. Arjuna's grandson Parikshit rules after them but dies after being bitten by a snake. His furious son, Janamejaya, decides to perform a snake sacrifice known as Sarpasatra to destroy the snakes. It's at that sacrifice that the tale of his ancestors is narrated to him. Sandy sat back with a sigh.